church, settled in a comfortable chair with a cup of coffee. As you can tell, as you can tell, I'm coming from a different location. Um, Church friends of mine have let me come down to their cabin by a lake for a couple of days to do some sermon planning. And so here I am from a lake down south of Hamlet. Beautiful location, a little different than where I normally am on a Wednesday morning. Um, so today we're getting near the end of our little foray through the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is faithfulness. You remember how they go. And the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. And so for today, the fruit of the Spirit is faithfulness. That's something that we, at least intellectually, we know what it means. We know the term faithfulness. The difficulty with faithfulness isn't so much knowing what it means, but actually in the follow through. We have trouble with the follow through sometimes. Um, in our wedding vows, we pledge to be faithful to our husband or wife, and yet how many marriages end up falling on the rocks because of adultery? The same thing in the church. how many um, how many people make professions of faith or decisions for Christ, and then they just filter away. Eugene Peterson had this great quote. I want to read it so I don't mess it up. Eugene Peterson died just a couple of years ago. Great Christian writer. I highly recommend him. And Peterson wrote this: "It is not difficult to get a person interested in the message of the gospel. It is terribly difficult to maintain the interest. Billions of people in our culture make decisions for Christ, but there is a dreadful attrition rate. Many claim to have been born again, but the evidence for mature Christian discipleship is slim." That's and that's a difficult saying. And he's right. He's right. In terms of Christian faithfulness, it's more than simply when you make a decision for Christ or your profession of faith. It's what takes place all that time afterwards. um, and for us, this is listed as a fruit of the Spirit. It's listed as a fruit of the Spirit. Um, so it's not something that we, as Christians, something that we can promise to do, but rather it is something that we can and should look at as a gift from God. Um, Look at faithfulness as a gift. Look at faithfulness as a fruit. It is a fruit of being a mature believer. And so we become more faithful by trying to become more mature in our faith. We become more faithful as a byproduct of being more filled with the Spirit, byproduct of being closer to Christ. Sometimes being faithful is a matter of, as they say, swimming upstream. Um, Going countercultural. If the prevailing culture heads this way, sometimes being faithful is going the other way. Um, that's simply the way it is, because our prevailing culture may or may not reflect the will of God. The prevailing culture may or may not reflect any form of Christ likeness. And in fact, I dare say the prevailing culture more often than not does not reflect the will of God. And So if we're going to be faithful, we will from time to time be going countercultural, be going against the grain, swimming upstream, whatever cliche you want to use there. That is part of being faithful. And we will be faithful to Christ and faithful to the gospel in spite of whatever, in spite of whatever. Um, and a little something that just comes to mind here that is interesting in our English translations um, of Romans and Galatians in particular. Paul might speak of faith in Jesus Christ, and in most of those cases where it says faith in Jesus Christ, it could just as easily be translated as the faithfulness of Christ, so that we might, so that where it says we are saved by faith in Christ or justified by faith in Christ, you could just as easily say that we are justified by the faithfulness of Christ. Um, that's something that the scholars debate about a lot right now, and really we need to look at that as a both and rather than an either or. We are saved by our faith in Christ and also by the faithfulness of Christ. Christ was faithful and he was obedient even to the point of death on a cross, according to Philippians 2. We are saved because Christ was faithful, and we are saved because we have faith. And in fact, you could say that um, our faith is only matters and is only useful because Christ was faithful first. Faithfulness is a gift from God. It's a fruit of a mature relationship with Christ. Um, so, what does faithfulness look like? What does faithfulness look like? Faithfulness um, in another person, faithfulness in the Christian life. Um, in some instances, being faithful is being the extreme. Being faithful in some instances is being martyred. Several years ago, I think it was 2016, maybe there was a 85-year-old French priest, Jacques Hamel, who was murdered in a church in Paris by a couple of Muslim extremists. They slit his throat as he was celebrating a mass. He was martyred, and that's that is being faithful. That is being faithful. But most of the time, for us as believers, being faithful doesn't take us to the point of martyrdom. Um, for us everyday believers, it may require martyrdom, but it is more likely to be simply a matter of being willing to say something, being willing to profess our faith, being willing to step out and help somebody else, to share our faith with somebody else, to do something. Being faithful to the gospel can be that. Being faithful to the gospel can be how we look after somebody else and what we say to somebody else and how we share our faith with them. That's that is being faithful. And being faithful can look like this. I'm not I'm not going to use their names, so I'm tempted to. In my first appointment, one of those churches, I had an elderly couple, and the wife had a series of mini strokes that left her progressively more and more disabled. And I remember going over to their house one time, not long before she died, and um, her elderly husband was feeding her with with like a syringe, squirting stuff into her mouth so she could get some nutrition. And that really touched me. That was faithfulness. He was being faithful to her. That is it. Faithfulness is always the idea that the Christian life is more than simply a one-time decision for Christ. The Christian life is more than a one-time profession of faith. Um, Faithfulness is a daily statement. It's a daily thing. It's a daily statement that whatever we will entrust our future and our lives to Jesus. Faithfulness is a daily statement, a daily decision, if you will, that we are entrusting our lives and our futures to Jesus. And if we believe that He holds a future that He is holding our lives, then we can be faithful and not worry about a thing. That is faithfulness. It is entrusting our lives to Jesus and trusting our futures to Him in the confidence and the assurance and the hope that He holds it. He holds it. And if He does, we don't have to. So that is faithfulness for this morning. Hope you've enjoyed it. Next week, we will come back to look at gentleness and self control and the fruit of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. A couple of more things that I'd like to mention. If you watch this on YouTube, subscribe to it so you can get these more easily. And also, I'm open to suggestions about where we go next from this point, where we go next after the fruit of the Spirit. I'm open to suggestions. Just put them in the comments section here on Facebook or on YouTube. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you next week.